Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gale Darkness video, where today we're going to be completing the game with the Victreebel line. Now, I do think that this line might be able to do very well, but that's only because of one main thing, and that's its means of evolution into the final form, because this is a Leafstone evolution. So whenever I get Weepinbell, I can decide to evolve into Victreebel whenever I want, which could be incredibly powerful if I play it right. But for now, let's go ahead and go over Bellsprout's stats. For base stats, it has 50 HP, 75 attack, 35 defense, 70 special attack, 30 special defense, and 40 speed, and gets access to mostly grass and normal type moves. However, it does get one stab poison option in acid, which isn't great, but at least it's something, and it won't get Razor Leaf once it evolves into Weepinbell until level 42, which is incredibly far into the run. So I do have an idea of how to get it sooner, but for now, let's go ahead and move on to our Bellsprout in particular, which has an impish nature, raising its defense but lowering its special attack. Not the best nature it could have had, but honestly, the extra defense might come in handy. It gets the chlorophyll ability, doubling its speed in sun, and while this is a decent ability, it's not great for single runs, simply because it's usually hard to set up sun. And according to Bulbapedia, it gets Vine Whip and Growth by level 10. So with that, let's go and move on. And the first thing I'm going to do is teach Bullet Seed, because I forgot that Vine Whip only has 10 PP. And then at level 15, I learn Sleep Powder, which I'm going to teach over Wrap. And then I go into the battle against the Old Man. And really the only threat on his team is the Abra, so I need to take that down immediately. Luckily it just goes for Thunder Punch, and I'm able to put it to sleep with Sleep Powder. And I'm going to use Vine Whip to start taking it down. Hopefully it doesn't take too many hits. It looks to be a 2-shot, so one more should do the trick. It doesn't wake up on the second turn, and Vine Whip finishes it off. Now I know Shroomish and Horsey really aren't that much of a threat, so I decide to start taking down the Horsey, which goes down to a single hit. Then all that's left is the Shroomish, which Vine Whip really isn't doing that much damage. Now I am risking Effect Spore by using Vine Whip because it's technically a contact move, but really being put to sleep or paralyzed doesn't really matter, and I don't think I can be poisoned because I'm part poison. So after a few Vine Whips, it gets taken down and we beat the Old Man. Now moving on to the battle against the Blue Power Ranger, I decided to fight him because I do have a type advantage against his water types. But unfortunately, Horsey just keeps using Smokescreen, and despite trying to raise my accuracy to counteract it, it just keeps going for it, so I decide to take it down. But that leaves me at an accuracy deficit going against the Spiel, and eventually I lose. So I decide to do just a little bit of training and evolve our Bellsprout into Weepinbell, which will definitely help with some of the fights coming up. But of course, with a new evolution means new stats. And Weepinbell has 65 HP, 90 attack, 50 defense, 85 special attack, 45 special defense, and 55 speed. And while that's only a small buff, we're only going to have Weepinbell for a short amount of time. But anyway, we move back into the battle against the Blue Power Ranger. This time, I can take down the Horsey in a single hit without needing a growth. And then out comes his Shadow Spiel. And Goldeen doesn't attack the first turn, or the second turn. Shadow Wave comes out, not doing that much damage. Vine Whip finishes off Spiel, and after a very weak peck and one last Vine Whip, Goldeen goes down and I beat Blue. Moving on, at level 24, I get the move Acid, which I teach over Bullet Seed, and after beating Naps, I now have access to the Leafstone, which I'm going to use immediately because the only move I wanted to learn before evolving was Acid. So with that, we evolve into Victreebel, and Victreebel has 80 HP, 105 attack, 65 defense, 100 special attack, 60 special defense, and 70 speed. So it is quite a bit stronger, a bit bulkier, and a little bit faster. Hopefully that 70 base speed isn't too slow that I can't outspeed major threats through the final area of the game. But at this stage of the game, we are incredibly powerful, so I think we're going to tear it through just about everything, at least up until the mid-game. So we move on to Laverina. She leads with a Beautifly and a Love Disc. I go for Acid immediately, which doesn't really do that much damage to either, but they can't really do that much damage to me either. So I go for another Acid, taking them both down to red. And because I don't really want to take down the Love Disc, I decide to go for Vine Whip to finish off the Beautifly. Unfortunately, it survives on just a sliver because it is 4 times resistant to Vine Whip. So another one does take it down, and then out comes Roselia, which is usually a big threat, but because I am a grass type, it can't actually use Leech Seed against me, so I can just ignore it. However, Acid is doing over half, so it would have gone down in 2 hits anyway. Then out comes the Shadow Delcatty. I use Acid, which doesn't really do that much to it, but finishes off Roselia. Shadow Rush takes me down to 24. I go for Sleep Powder and miss. Get taken down to 11, go for another Sleep Powder, which does luckily hit this time, and I go for Acid, which takes it down to yellow, and one last finishes it off. Now, of course, you can't have a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video without the obligatory Mirror Bee. How you doing today, Mirror Bee? Well, it's always good to see ya. Anyway, at the Real Gam Tower, I pick up my 2 favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect. And our Hidden Power type is Ghost, which isn't really all that useful, so I decide not to teach it. Instead, I go over to the Tutor Lady and pick up the move for Body Slam and teach it over Vine Whip, which might seem kinda strange, but I think it's finally time to go pick up the move I've been wanting for quite a while now. And I had tried to do Mount Battle Area 3 at around level 34 and lost. However, now at level 43, I get through it easily, and I get up to 1,000 points, which I can put into Razor Leaf. Now the funny thing is that the whole point of this was to not be level 42 when we got Razor Leaf, but here we are at level 43. But the thing is that we would have had to be a Weepinbell to this point, which isn't nearly as good. Anyway, we go into the battle against Snattle. He leads with a Lantern and a Quagsire. I go for Growth on the first turn, just to guarantee that I can take down his Pokemon a little easier. Lantern goes down in a single hit, Quagsire goes down in a single hit, and then out comes Shadow, Lunatone, and Castform. Now if Lunatone does actually survive a Razor Leaf, which it doesn't, it would have set up Shadow Sky, which really isn't that much of an issue, but it is a little bit annoying. Anyway, another Razor Leaf doing a decent amount of damage to Matang, surprisingly, despite being resisted, and another one finishes it off. Okay, well with that, we go ahead and move on to the next boss fight against Gonzap. He leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf. I use the first turn to raise my accuracy, that way Razor Leaf is 100% accurate, and Sleep Powder is a reliable option. Now luckily the Electrode actually isn't going for Spark here, it's just going for Sonic Boom, so I'm not at risk of being paralyzed, and I'm able to take it down with a Razor Leaf crit. Then out comes Vileplume, which nearly goes down to a Body Slam. Unfortunately it does land a Sleep Powder of its own, putting me to sleep, so I will need to call this turn to wake it up, and it just goes for Giga Drain, not doing any damage. I go for Razor Leaf to finish off Vileplume and Nuzleaf, and then out comes his final 2 Pokemon, Whiscash and Skarmory. Now between the two, Skarmory is definitely the bigger threat, but I take down Whiscash in a single hit with Razor Leaf, and then all that's left is a Skarmory. It uses Aerial Ace, doing a bit of damage, but just a couple more Razor Leafs will take it down, and we beat Gonzap on the first attempt. Moving on to the top of the Cipher Pyramid, and I run into this Weepinbell here. Now this Weepinbell is the ideal Weepinbell to use, and that's because it gets Sludge Bomb, which is the best poison type move. It gets Magical Leaf, which isn't quite as versatile as Razor Leaf, but it is guaranteed accurate and does even more damage than Razor Leaf, and it gets a reliable healing option in Morning Sun. All of that to say that had this Weepinbell come earlier in the game, I definitely would have swapped for it, but unfortunately it's just too late. So anyway, we move on to Gorgon, who leads with a Lairon and a Celio. I go for Growth on the first turn, because Celio's just going to be using Earthquake, which does almost no damage because Leftover heals it off. Aurora Beam does a bit more damage, and Iron Tail luckily doesn't get a defense drop. And I go for another Growth, another Earthquake, getting a crit this time. And finally, I'm going to start my sweep at +3 special attack. Razor Leaf takes down both of his lead Pokemon. Out comes Slowking and Ursaring. Go for another Razor Leaf, but unfortunately Slowking evades it, hitting me with a very weak Earthquake. Go for another Razor Leaf, which takes it down, and takes Ursaring down, and then out comes his final 2 Pokemon, Shadow Primeape, which could be a threat if left unchecked, and Shadow Hypno, which might actually survive a Razor Leaf. And Primeape goes down, and Hypno survives in yellow, hits me with the Shadow Storm, doing a little bit of damage, but Body Slam finishes it off, and we move on to the final area of the game. Now with its current time, if it were to do very well, it could be an A+ tier Pokemon. However, the grass type falls off really hard in the last area of the game. But maybe Victreebel will surprise me. We go into the battle against Lavrina. She leads with a Gardevoir and a Gorbis. I'm able to take down Gardevoir in a single hit. And then out comes Roselia. Gorbis hits me with an Ice Beam, doing quite a bit of damage. Go for Body Slam to finish off Roselia. And then she sends out her Shadow Farfetch'd, which is really annoying because it likes to use Shadow Panic, causing confusion. I get hit by another Ice Beam, taking me down to about half, and then finally she sends out her last Pokemon, which is Shadow Altaria. Another Ice Beam takes me down to a quarter, and I go for Razor Leaf to take down the Gorbis. And then all that's left is the Altaria, which, from the look of it, I should be able to take down, as long as I don't get crit. Well, that's a bit annoying. Anyway, going into the battle once again, I realized that I really don't want to be frozen by Ice Beam, so I decided to leave Roselia alive. Unfortunately, I forgot that it has Attract, so now I need to take it down, but because I took it down, it gave Farfetch'd the option to hit me with Shadow Panic, and then after just a few turns, I'm taken down. So that's not great. Anyway, third attempt now. And it's the exact same as the first attempt, other than the fact that I don't get crit by the Altaria. So this should have been a first try victory, but unfortunately, due to a bit of bad luck and my lack of foresight, forgetting that Roselia would just use Attract on me, it now became a third attempt. Not great, but honestly, I think Victreebel can recover from this, as long as it does well against the next boss, which is Snaddle. He leads with a Metang and a Quagsire. I go for Razor Leaf right off the bat, taking Quagsire down with a crit, which I don't think it actually needed. Metang hits a Psychic, doing much more damage than I thought it would. I go for Growth. Aerial Ace hits me, doing a little bit of damage, and another Psychic takes me down to half. Okay, well, I go for Razor Leaf now, doing quite a bit to Metang, but doing almost nothing to the Scizor. Another Psychic takes me down to 34. And another Razor Leaf doesn't quite finish off Metang, and I get taken down. Okay, well that's not great, and after a few more attempts, I realized that it's just not going to happen at this level. So I decided to do a little bit of training in Mount Battle, just to get up to a higher level. And even with the higher level, this is now the third attempt after doing that training, and the 9th attempt overall. It's still quite lucky for Victreebel to actually win. So I need to land the 75% accurate sleep on both Quagsire and Metang, then raise my accuracy by 1, and then go for growth setup. Now there are 3 big key factors to actually winning this battle. The first is that I set up against Quagsire and Metang, and the reason I didn't do this before was because Metang lowers my speed, which puts me at a disadvantage against his final Pokemon, which is a very quick, very strong Shadow Starmie. The second is that I was trying to use 2 or 3 growths, which I really only need 1 in order to take down Solrock and Shadow Starmie, so that was a bit of a waste of time. And finally, I need decent sleep luck. Honestly, this wasn't great sleep luck because Metang woke almost immediately, but if I could just have a few turns in order to take down individual Pokemon, I don't think that this would have taken as many tries as it did. Anyway, Solrock goes down to the Razor Leaf, then out comes Castform. Aerial Ace hits, taking me down to 42 HP. I go for Sleep Powder to put the Scizor to sleep, and Castform hits a Flamethrower, taking me down to 14. And another Sleep Powder to put the Castform to sleep. And now I can sit around and heal for a turn. Go for Body Slam to start taking down the Scizor. Luckily, they both are still asleep, and Body Slam finishes it off. And then out comes his Shadow Starmie, which, because I do have a speed drop, I am slower than, so I do need to put it to sleep. And then it now comes down to the luck of Castform, which luckily it doesn't wake up, and I go for Body Slam to take it down, and with Razor Leaf only being against 1 target, it's able to take down Starmie, and we beat Snaddle on the 9th attempt. Anyway, moving on to Ardos, he leads with an Alakazam and a Swellow. I go for Body Slam into Alakazam immediately because I don't want to be hit by Ice Punch, Fire Punch, or Psychic. And luckily Swellow just sets up Shadow Sky. Go for Body Slam to take it down, and then out comes Heracross. The Kingdra hits me with an Ice Beam, doing quite a bit of damage. Fruity Pebbles rain down, doing damage to all of us. And then I go for Body Slam to take down Kingdra in a single hit. then out comes Electabuzz, and unfortunately Heracross hits a Rock Tomb, so I think I might actually be slower than the Electabuzz now. I go for Body Slam, and I am. It takes me down to 10 HP. Body Slam is enough to take it down in a single hit though. Out comes his final Pokemon, Shadow Snorlax. And Rock Tomb misses, but Fruity Pebbles finished me off. So I decided to teach Protect over Growth because I really only needed Growth for Snaddle, and we go into the battle once again, this now being the third attempt. And really, as usual, it comes down to luck with the Swellow, because it decided to start using Shadow Half, which isn't nearly as nice as Shadow Sky because I take an immediate half damage, but luckily it does have to recharge on the next turn. This turn it's actually going to use Shadow Sky, as I saw in the previous attempt. And also, I know for a fact Electabuzz is the bigger threat because its Shadow Storms do a lot more damage than Swellow's Shadow Break. And then out comes his final Pokemon, which is the Shadow Snorlax once again. Fruity Pebbles rain down. And because the Snorlax is out, Swellow should just be going for Shadow Mist to lower my evasion. And it does. I'm able to put the Snorlax to sleep, and it stays asleep. Fruity Pebbles rain down. I go for Body Slam, which takes Snorlax down to half. Unfortunately, Swellow decides to swap over to start using Shadow Break. So I am in a bit of danger here. I decide to go for Protect. And Snorlax wakes up this turn. Fruity Pebbles stop. And I'm hoping that the Swellow is going to try to set it up again. It doesn't, it just goes for Shadow Mist, and I'm able to finish it off with one last Body Slam. And so Ardos wasn't too bad. Moving on to Gorgon, he leads with a Slowking and an Ursaring, and I go for Body Slam to take down Slowking in a single hit. Then out comes Aggron, which I go for Razor Leaf, which takes it down to half, but without a better range, I think Ursaring is going to be a 3-shot with Razor Leaf. So I go for Protect here, just to heal up a little bit, and then go for Razor Leaf, which takes down the Aggron. And Ursaring survives on just a sliver. Out comes Walrein, and I go for another Razor Leaf, which takes Walrein down to yellow. Walrein hits an Earthquake, doing very little damage. I go for another Razor Leaf, but Walrein evades, and Ursaring goes down. Out comes Poliwrath. Now, Shadow Poliwrath really isn't that much of a threat on the first turn because it only sets up Shadow Sky. So I go for Razor Leaf to finish off the Walrein, and it takes Poliwrath down to half. Then out comes Shadow Mr. Mime. Now Mr. Mime is a bit of a threat, but I think I can take it down with just a single Body Slam, which it does, and then all that's left is Poliwrath, who uses Shadow Storm, which had that gotten a crit would have taken me down. But one last Body Slam finishes off Poliwrath, and I beat Gorgon on the first attempt. Moving on to Aldous, he leads with a Shadow Manectric and Ninjask. The Manectric does have the static ability, so hitting it with Body Slam is a bit dangerous, but I do need to take it down as quick as possible. And then out comes Shadow Salamence, and I can Sleep Powder it, which misses. Shadow Rush really doesn't do that much damage though. Go for another Protect so I don't get hit by Aerial Ace. And then go for another Sleep Powder, which does hit this time. And because I want consistency with Sleep Powder, I decide to use Call this turn. Ninjask hits me with a weak Aerial Ace. Salamence wakes up immediately, hitting me with a Shadow Rush. I go for another Sleep Powder, but miss it, which I think is incredibly unlucky. Go for another Protect, and then I go for another Sleep Powder. Luckily this one actually hits, and Salamence goes back to sleep. Hopefully it'll sleep long enough for me to take it down. Body Slam doesn't even do half, and it wakes up immediately again, hitting me with a Shadow Rush. And I decide just to start taking it down. Body Slam, get a lucky paralysis, but it doesn't get paralyzed. And go for Protect. And one last Body Slam will take it down. And then out comes his next Pokemon, which is Flygon, which could be a threat, but I think the only way it could actually defeat me is if it were to burn me, which with Flamethrower is very unlikely. So Body Slam doesn't quite finish it off, it hits a Flamethrower, and guess what? A burn. Okay, well that's very unfortunate. And 4 HP, Body Slam does take it down, which brings out Shadow Marowak, but unfortunately I won't even get the chance to try to attack it before I go down. Okay, well seeing the damage I was doing to Salamence, I decided to go ahead and teach Double Edge over Body Slam. And now on the 4th attempt, I go into it once again. Same start as before, take down Manectric right away, out comes Salamence. But now that I have the extra damage of Double Edge, Salamence is now a 2-shot. However, I still want to call and use Sleep Powder, Now, something I forgot about is because there was technically no move used between the last protect and this protect, it actually failed. So it was doing the 50-50 protect, which I just happened to lose. And then I go for sleep powder to finally put the salamence to sleep. Unfortunately, because I am at such a low health, I will have to stall for a bit. At least once I get salamence down to a lower health. Go for protect. And salamence wakes up. And I put it back to sleep again. And then I go for another protect. And this is all just to get my health up a little bit higher before I go into the Flygon, because it's still not a one-shot, even with double edge, so I do need to have as much health as I can in case it wakes up and it hits me with flamethrower. So first thing I do is put it to sleep, and then I need to protect on the next turn as to not be hit by aerial ace. And unfortunately it wakes up immediately, so I need to use another turn putting it to sleep. But this does help the stalling tactic a bit because I am getting more and more health every time it wakes up. I go for double edge to start taking it down, which actually does take it down in a single hit. Okay, well it must have just been a bad range last time then. Out comes Shadow Marowak, go for protect. And then I go for Razor Leaf, which takes it down in a single hit. And then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Lapras. Now luckily Lapras isn't really that much of a threat on the first turn, so I decide to take down the Ninjask now. And the reason for that is because I want to Razor Leaf to do as much damage as it can against a single target. But not before I put it to sleep, just to guarantee my safety. Pretty Pebbles rain down, go for Razor Leaf, which doesn't quite take it down in a single hit, but luckily it doesn't wake up, and Razor Leaf finishes it off. So with that, we go ahead and move on to the big box legendary, Shadow Lugia, and I go for Sleep Powder immediately. And then I go for Double Edge, taking it down nearly to half. Luckily it's still asleep, go for another Double Edge, taking it down to red. And it's still asleep, go for Protect. It wakes up, but luckily I'm protected, and Razor Leaf finishes it off. So I'm at nearly full health going into the final battle. Against Victreebel, he leads with a Shadow, Rhydon, and Moltres. I go for Double Edge, which doesn't quite one-shot the Moltres. So I think I might just need to use the rare candies to reach that. I go for Protect to heal up a little bit. And I go for Razor Leaf, which does take down Rhydon in a single hit, but does almost nothing to Moltres. Out comes Executor. Another Shadow Fire, taking me down to yellow. I go for Protect once again. And then I go for Double Edge to finish off the Moltres. And I think in hindsight, maybe just for the testing stage, I should have taken down Executor because now I'm at -1 attack. And I go for Sleep Powder, which misses the Tauros. It sets up Shadow Sky, so now I'm not healing anymore. And if I'm lucky, I might be able to survive long enough to have the Tauros use Shadow Sky once again if I just stall it out. Go for Sleep Powder to put Executor to sleep. And Tauros hits a Shadow Rush, not actually doing that much damage. But unfortunately I can't heal it off. I get my accuracy raised to make sure I can hit the next Sleep Powder I use. So I go for Protect. And the Shadowy Aura fades. Unfortunately between the two I need to put Tauros to sleep if I'm actually going to heal. And Executor uses Shadow Storm and takes me down with a crit. Okay, well let's go into the battle once again. I have now used my rare candies and Double Edge is still not a one-shot. So after a bit of Mount Battle training, and a bit of training here, this is now the 11th attempt where I'm able to take down Moltres on the first turn with Double Edge. And then I call in front of these two because chances are only one of them actually hits. Unfortunately, I get unlucky, and they both hit. Go for Protect to heal up a bit. And because I need to be at a higher health, I decide to put the Rhydon to sleep. And Executor misses, luckily, so I put it to sleep as well. And unfortunately, I do just need to stall for a few turns in order to raise my health a bit. Go for Protect. Both are still asleep. I go for Razor Leaf to finish off the Rhydon and do a bit of damage to Executor. And then out comes the Shadow Tauros once again. I go for Sleep Powder to put it to sleep. And luckily, Executor hasn't decided to wake up yet. So I'm able to take down the Executor and start dealing damage to Tauros with Razor Leaf. And then out comes the Articuno, which first thing I need to do is put to sleep. And once it's asleep, I will be able to take it down slowly with double edge, which it does over half damage. Luckily Articuno's still asleep, go for another double edge to finish it off. And Tauros was apparently very tired because it's still sleeping. It finally wakes up, sets up Shadow Sky, so now I won't be healing anymore, but at this point I think I have enough health to where that's not really an issue. Of course I go for a sleep powder to put the Zapdos to sleep as well. And then Tauros uses Shadow Hold. Fruity Pebbles rain down, and I decide it's finally time to take down the Tauros with Razor Leaf. And it doesn't really do that much damage to Zapdos. I go for the first double edge, which takes it down to red. And Zapdos wakes up, hits me with a Shadow Bolt. Luckily it's not a crit. And I'm able to take it down with one last double edge and beat the game. So how well did Victreebel do? Well, it beat the game at a time of 13 hours, 32 minutes, and 4 seconds at level 90 with 31 feints throughout the game. Which isn't too terrible, at least until you get to Citydark Isle. At 2x speed, I was able to get to Citydark Isle at a time of 3 hours and 37 minutes. I didn't end up beating the game until 6 hours and 46 minutes, meaning that I spent more time on Citydark Isle than I did the rest of the game. Which is honestly the biggest downfall of the grass type, is that even though it's not a terrible type throughout the game, even though I would say it's still probably bottom 3, it just does so poorly against the final area of the game because so many of the Pokemon simply resist it or have moves to deal with it. So unfortunately Victreebel finds itself in the C tier next to Tropius, a fellow grass type, and now I'm kind of wondering in hindsight whether or not it would have been better to actually pick up that Weepinbell at the top of the pyramid, because it would have the extra power with Sludge Bomb and the kind of reliable healing with Morning Sun. But the thing is that it's only level 32, and by the time I was there I was nearly level 60, so I would have had to do an insane amount of grinding, as well as I would have had to get there as a Weepinbell instead of a Victreebel, which I just don't think is a feasible option, because I would have lost so much more time as a Weepinbell. And of course this is all just speculation because I didn't do it, but I do think it probably would have been slower. But anyway, with that, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!